Hello and welcome. Could a computer predict the future? Well, it seems it already has, very successfully. It predicted the outbreak of the Al-Aqsa Intifada of 2000, 2 years before it happened. It predicted that the Chinese government would crack down on dissidents 4 months before Tiananmen Square in 1989, and that the 1998 peace accords between Britain and Northern Ireland, known as the Good Friday Agreement, would be implemented, with precise detail. These and other incredibly accurate predictions are the result of a mathematical model used by an eminent political scientist who has found his work in demand among political, academic, and even intelligence circles. Professor Bruce Bueno de Mesquita, who teaches at both New York University and Stanford University, has applied game theory and rational choice theory to international politics. Now, besides forecasting political events, including studies for the US government on Iran's nuclear ambitions, the professor's recent work focuses on the chances for democratization in undemocratic places and the effects of foreign aid on developing countries. Professor Bruce Bueno de Mesquita has also just co-authored, along with US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and others, a book that seems fit for an American election year, as it's entitled The Strategy of Campaigning: Lessons from Ronald Reagan and Boris Yeltsin. And don't forget, you can call us with your questions and comments, and our new number is 1 for the USA, 202-775-2360. Mobile text messages can be sent to country code 44 for the UK, 7797 800 600. Professor, it's great that you could join us.
My pleasure.
First of all, sir, I've got to ask you, your computer model making those predictions is based, as I mentioned, on game theory and rational choice theory. I would ask really if you, just for our viewers, explain that in a nutshell, please.
Sure. Rational choice is an assumption that people do what they believe is in their best interest. It may turn out that what they've done is not in their best interest, but when they choose, given what they know and what they believe in, they do what they think will be best for them. Game theory is a special branch of rational choice theory that looks at how people interact, taking into account that they know others will react to what they do, and choosing what they do based on their expectations about what will give them the best chance of getting what they want, conditioned by the fact that other people will be responding and want different things.
Now, so is it essentially based on sort of predictable or established human nature?
Well, I think it's a good description of human nature. It's hard to think of people who don't try to do what's good for themselves. As far as I can tell, the only two types of people for whom that's not always true are very, very young children who don't have well-formed preferences yet, and schizophrenics who also don't have well-formed preferences. Otherwise, yeah, pretty much people do what they think is good for them.
What do you believe was your most impressive prediction, Professor, in your opinion?
That's a hard question. In some respects, my very first published prediction may have been the most impressive. I predicted in a paper in 1984 who would succeed Ayatollah Khomeini when he died. He died in 1989, so it was obviously a real prediction. And my paper, by name, specified that there would be shared leadership in Iran by Rafsanjani and Khamenei. The thing I think that was most encouraging and perhaps impressive about that prediction is that at the time the paper was published, Ayatollah Khomeini had designated a successor, Ayatollah Montazeri. And so Iran specialists, who were the people who provided me with the data that led to my prediction, nevertheless, they were certain that it was going to be Ayatollah Montazeri. I think on another front, in the mid to late 80s, I was asked to design a strategy to help keep Taiwan in the Asian Development Bank when China applied for admission. And I did design such a strategy. The people in the State Department thought it was impossible for Taiwan to remain in and to enter China. Today, the Asian Development Bank remains the only major international organization in the world that has both China and Taiwan in it. I thought that was an interesting and an important accomplishment.
There's a lot of the world for you to fix yet, I can tell you. But let me get one of the many questions. We had so many by internet email in advance. I actually want to get a whole string of these to you and get your responses. First one from Gary B. in the USA. And Gary says, I find this to be very interesting, but I'm left wondering about your predictions that never panned out. Any major failures?
Sure. Remember, the accuracy rate is about 90%, so about 10% are wrong. And I've learned a lot from the wrong predictions. My single biggest failure was in a consulting context. I was engaged in late 1992 by a large brokerage house to work out what the health care bill was going to look like when Bill Clinton became president. I modeled, I think it was 27 different dimensions of legislation, made predictions about each, and got 100% of them wrong. Now, there was a good reason, and I learned a lot from that. The good reason was that what my modeling indicated was that the person who was going to be most important in shepherding the legislation through the Congress was Dan Rostenkowski. And shortly after I completed my analyses, Dan Rostenkowski was indicted on, I believe it was 17 felony counts. So his attentiveness to health care kind of went out the window. He was trying to stay out of jail, which he didn't succeed in doing. He went to jail. So I learned to design into the model some ways to what I call shock the data. That is, introduce random changes in the inputs to see how stable a result is. And I must say that when I removed Dan Rostenkowski from my data set, the model got all of the cases right. It said nothing would pass. So that was the worst prediction. They don't happen very often, fortunately.
We've got on the line Akeem from the United Kingdom. So Akeem, let's ask your question to the professor, please.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hi.
I can see very good debate you are talking about. If you look at the African country as a very good example,
okay,
the technology can be useful for developed country.
And now, actually, that's an interesting point, Akeem, and I put this to the professor. Your work actually is focused a lot on developing countries right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and Africa is certainly one of the areas that I pay pretty close attention to in my current research. Africa's problems, in my opinion, are overwhelmingly political. The world focuses on Africa's economic problems, but the vast majority of the economic problems are, in my view, induced, created by bad governance. Governance structures that serve the interests of leaders but not the interests of citizens. And I'm working with some colleagues currently, and have been for the past several years, on modeling ways to change that, and also modeling ways to anticipate which countries are particularly susceptible to having significant changes in how they're governed.
Right. We have
unfortunately, in my sorry.
I was going to say, actually, I was going to get another one to you here, which actually may touch on what you're talking about to some degree, but it's, you mentioned about, governance. This email that came in, it was anonymous from someone who wouldn't leave their details, but it says, are you advocating a political science based on tools and bereft of ethical principles?
Not at all. I don't see any conflict, inherent conflict between science and ethics. I'm advocating a study of politics that addresses how the world actually works, because you can't make the world work the way you would like it to unless you first understand how it actually works and what the sources are of problems. Then different people can disagree about how to fix the problems, and different people can use technology in different ways to try to fix problems in the ways they think are appropriate. But no fixes are possible just by wishful thinking. First, you have to understand how things work, and that's what science is about.
This email that came from Madeleine Lebeau in Paris, in France, the word Nostradamus has been used in articles about you as well. And here it says, if one knows human nature and also knows history, then one can predict the future. Situations reoccur, human nature stays the same. This is why people think Nostradamus is predicting the future when he's just reaffirming that human nature remains constant. I guess basically what he's saying is if you understand human nature, you can make these predictions that you are.
I think that's right. In understanding human nature, however, you have to be very rigorous about being careful that you write down the logic that reflects what you believe constitutes human nature, and you test that logic against data to see whether it accurately accounts for past behavior, and most importantly accounts for future behavior, which is what I try to do in my research. But I think it's basically right. I don't change human nature. I have no ambition to change human nature. That's almost by definition not doable. Right. The idea is to understand it and then to utilize it in an effective way.
We have on the line Ayan Lee from Somalia. Good to hear from Somalia. Ayan Lee, what would you like to ask? Go ahead.
Yes, Rizkan, it's a pleasure to talk to Al Jazeera. But my question is, you know, computers are machines. So machines, they are, those people who are using the machines are the ones who are making the prediction. It's not the machines.
Actually,
so my point is...
Yeah. Go ahead, Ayan Lee.
Ayala from Hargeisa, Somaliland.
Okay, listen, Ayan, let me get that to the professor. Actually, Professor, what Ayan Lee in Somalia is saying is a question I wanted to put to you, which is, you know, there is this concept of what goes in is really determines what comes out. I mean, I think you use the phrase garbage in, garbage out. So how important is it that the computer is getting the right information in the first place, and how can you guarantee what you're putting in is accurate?
Well, that's a very important question. This is why you need not only the logic to structure prediction, but also evidence. And I look at my predictive track record as evaluated, for example, by journalists and evaluated by academics who are very keen to shoot down work of other academics, and also an evaluation done by the Central Intelligence Agency. They all come to the conclusion that this model on thousands of applications is right about 90% of the time. That means that I have formulated apparently the right questions to ask experts to create the input into the model. Now, what I ask experts is very minimal. We define what the questions are that I'm going to try to produce answers to. For each question, I ask the expert, who are the groups and individuals who will try to influence the decision? It can be any number. The game theory model I've designed is very flexible. For each of those stakeholders, I need to know just three things, and I need to know them as numbers. I need to know on the issue I'm looking at, what is the outcome that each of those stakeholders currently advocates? Not what do they think they will get, not what in their heart of hearts do they hope to get, but what is it that they currently are arguing for? Next, I need to know how salient the issue is for them. How focused are they on the question? That is, how willing are they to drop other things that they have to attend to when the issue comes up? Or how far down in the pecking order do they push the issue? And finally, I need an estimate of how much clout they could bring to bear if they chose to try as hard as they can relative to the other players. That's all the information I need. And it turns out that people who are experts on countries or on problem areas know this information. Right. One might ask, why does the model outperform those people? And I might add that I've been my own expert, and it's outperformed me. And I know the logic that goes into the model perfectly. And I think the answer is very straightforward. The model is not nearly as smart as a smart decision maker, but it has an advantage. A smart person can't keep track of more than maybe the interactions among 5 or 6 people. If there are 5 people interacting, there are 5 factorial or 120 possible pairs of interactions that can occur. Right. If there are 10 people, then there are more than 3 million. Well, people can keep the 120 in their heads, but they can't keep the 3 million straight in their heads. And if there are more than 10, they certainly can't. The computer can. It doesn't get bored. It doesn't get tired. And it has a fabulous memory.
Well, we've got a call on the line from Saudi Arabia. Good to hear from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mohammed, your question, please.
Yes, has the professor applied his model to whether confrontation between the United States and Iran is inevitable? And on a broader level, we should start teaching this gaming theory to social scientists and politicians. And, you know, they always hate mathematics, so how are we going to take care of that problem?
2 great questions. That was military confrontation between the U.S. and Iran, not Iraq, I assume.
Iran, I think.
Yes? Yeah. I have looked at that, and I see the likelihood of a U.S.-Iranian military confrontation, by which I assume you mean something of significance, as very low. A lot of blustering. One of the things the modeling does is it looks for bluffs. There's a lot of bluffing that goes on, but very low probability of military confrontation, according to my analyses. With regard to teaching game theory, so virtually everybody in economics who studies economics learns a significant amount of game theory. And as you move away from economics into political science, it's a smaller group. And as you move out of political science to sociology and psychology, it's a vanishingly small group. And this is tragic. I mean, it is correct that people who choose to study most social sciences or the humanities do so in part to get away from mathematics. But mathematics is an extremely rigorous language. You know, when you say something in English, and I speak a little Urdu, when you say something in Urdu, there are many interpretations to the statement. When you write an equation down, there's very little ambiguity. Right. And that's really the only purpose of the math, to make sure that the logic is transparent so you can find errors. And we should be teaching that to students, and we are. And we should have politicians who know more of this, and that unfortunately has been a slow development. Just to add quickly, in the United States, one of the great changes that we have seen in terms of people who are economic advisors to government is that they are now almost all first-line economists who have very good knowledge of mathematical modeling. That's slowly, very slowly changing on the political side.
Let's squeeze in a very quick call here by Ahmed in the UK. Ahmed, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Riz. I've been listening to the professor, and I was very much interested to know whether his strategy theory did work with respect to Kenya and the problems which have come out in East Africa and the future of East Africa as a whole.
Very quick answer. Unfortunately, I didn't look at the Kenyan situation, and so it neither worked nor didn't work. It wasn't applied.
Well, sir, with about 40 seconds to go, let me ask you if there's anything we can ask you regarding the US election, which everyone obviously is watching closely. It seems to be going backwards and forwards.
Well, I think putting the model aside, any reasonable prediction is that whoever the Democrats nominate is going to be the next president of the United States. I think the only Republican who might have a shot at getting elected is John McCain, because he appeals to a lot of independent voters. But given how the United States has done over the past several years, I would think that the odds of a Democrat are overwhelming.
And in a line, if you had a model you could study given time and resources, what would you look at, sir? In any particular area?
Well, one of the things that I have started to play around looking at is the possibility of a third-party candidate in the center. There's a movement, Unity 08, in the United States to create a bipartisan political party that occupies the center, that's trying, or people are trying to encourage the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, to run. And I have started to look at whether that's feasible.
Well, Professor, I can guarantee you, I can predict we'll definitely have you back and ask you some more questions. Thank you for being with us, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for being with us too as our viewers. On the next show, we speak with former President of Mexico, Vicente Fox, about his country's relations with the US and his views on American foreign policy. Should be interesting. Send your questions to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is next.